So in all of the insanity last week, war in Iran, Epstein files, I mean, you name it, right? The Department of Justice, and specifically the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, Trump law-lackey, personal lawyer, man who never met a Trump ass that he didn't want to kiss, Todd Blanche very quietly did a very bad thing. He rescinded a Biden administration policy that had incredibly important restrictions placed on law enforcement as to when they were required to seek a warrant from a judge or even internally at the Department of Justice before attempting to enter a home, a residence, without knocking in advance. So, a memo that was obtained by MS Now, and I'm citing to Carol Lenig, a DOJ memo signed by Todd Blanche and issued to all of the top supervisors and United States attorneys across the country, said that no-knock entries, meaning entering a residence without knocking first and identifying yourself as law enforcement, no-knock entries are now permissible for a much wider set of circumstances, factual circumstances, than before. And previously, the no-knock situation was such that if law enforcement feared risk of personal harm or risk of danger to their personal safety, they didn't have to knock and announce. Makes sense, right? Because they could get hurt. But now it's not just when they fear safety risks, but now when there's a risk that evidence could be destroyed. I mean, I want you to stop and think about that for a second. If you're law enforcement, what are you going to do? In every scenario, you're going to say that you credibly feared that evidence is going to be destroyed if you were to knock and announce your presence before attempting to enter. And so you pretty much have now guaranteed that law enforcement across the country are going to basically do no-knock entry. Alrighty, so let's get into the actual policy as it used to exist. And I have it here. And this is, again, a Biden-era policy. And the person who actually was driving this policy at the Department of Justice was the amazing Vanita Gupta. She was the former Associate Attorney General under Biden. And she, with Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, the two of them in the Biden administration, led to the creation of this policy that I am about to share with you. So, I mean, I'm reading it off of a press release from the DOJ, but it has the policy contained within it. And the headline for the press release says, Department of Justice announces department-wide policy on chokeholds and no-knock entries. The DOJ announced, and this is back on September 14th, 2021, Biden era. Yet another example of why Biden was infinitely the better president. The DOJ had a written department-wide policy, one, explicitly prohibiting the use of chokeholds and carotid restraints, carotid artery restraints, unless deadly force is authorized. And two, a written department-wide policy limiting the circumstances in which federal law enforcement components are authorized to use unannounced entries. Under the new policies, Departments of Justice law enforcement components would be prohibited or were prohibited from using chokeholds and carotid restraints unless deadly force is authorized. That is, when the officer has a reasonable belief that the subject of such force poses an imminent danger of death or serious physical injury to the officer or to another person. So that was the chokehold policy, right? Now, let's talk about knock and announce. Federal agents are generally required to knock and announce their identity, authority, and purpose and to demand to enter before entry is made to execute a warrant in a private dwelling. However, there are some circumstances where unannounced entries are authorized. The new policy, so this was new back then in 2021, limited the use of no-knock entries in connection with the execution of a warrant, and it was limited to situations only where the agent had reasonable grounds to believe that knocking and announcing the agent's presence would create an imminent threat of physical violence to the agent and/or another person. Quote, this new policy, as in back in 2021, is narrower than what is permitted by law. In setting the policy this way, the department was limiting the use of higher risk, no-knock entries to only those instances where physical safety is at stake. And it placed a requirement on the law enforcement agent to have to go and get supervisory approval from both a federal prosecutor as well as that agent's law enforcement component. I mean, it's pretty amazing, right? And what was this based on? Well, according to Vanita Gupta, there was an extensive year-long review of the best policing practices in which federal agents and state and local law enforcement weighed in and generally supported the changes. Okay, so think about it. You have this extensive review, and law enforcement supports this idea of limiting the times when you are allowed to enter a private residence, a private dwelling, without having to announce your presence, knock and announce. And why did this new policy come to pass? Well, do you remember Breonna Taylor? Her death back in March of 2020 was such a horrific incident, criminal act, okay, that it galvanized not only the public. I mean, you'll remember the protests in the street, the civil disobedience, right? All of the great things that we can do as Americans under the First Amendment to express our discontent with something that happens and our disagreement. But it also led to widespread policy changes because a woman was murdered in her own home in the middle of the night. So I'm just going to refresh your recollection about it because it makes sense that the Department of Justice would institute this policy after Breonna Taylor's murder. And then, of course, it also makes sense that somebody like Todd Blanche would say, to hell with it, we don't need it anymore. So shortly after midnight on March 13th of 2020, Louisville Police Department officers executing a search warrant used a battering ram to enter Breonna Taylor's apartment. She was a 26-year-old ER technician. She and her boyfriend heard loud banging at the door of their apartment. They both called out asking who was there. And then basically the police broke the door off its hinges with a battering ram. So Breonna's boyfriend fired his gun once, striking one of the cops in the thigh. In response, the police collectively, more than one officer, fired several rounds, striking Breonna at least 5 times. One officer blindly shot at least 10 rounds into Breonna's apartment. And here's where you get really angry. Investigators explained that Breonna was coughing and struggled to breathe for at least 5 minutes after she was shot by the cops. An ambulance that had been on standby outside the apartment had been ordered to leave an hour before the execution of the warrant, before the raid happened, which was counter to standard operating procedure. Police officers called the ambulance back to the scene to render aid to one of their colleagues, a fellow officer, as Breonna Taylor struggled to breathe and was not given any medical attention. It was not until 5 minutes after the shooting that emergency personnel realized that Breonna was seriously wounded. Why? Because her boyfriend called 911. I mean, it's like you can't even make up the facts because they're so fucking egregious.
Balances are rising, fees are piling up, and that's when you know it's time for PDS debt. Minimum payments are designed to stretch debt out for years, and PDS debt, it's already helped hundreds of thousands reduce what they owe and to take back control. So whether you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, or medical bills, PDS debt has custom options to help you get out of debt. They go beyond the numbers to understand your unique financial situation and to craft a personalized plan that's designed just for you. There's no minimum credit score required. They're here to help you save more, pay off your debt debt faster and start putting money back where it belongs, in your pocket. PDS Debt is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau. It boasts thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and holds a 5-star rating on Trustpilot. Why? Because PDS Debt has helped hundreds of thousands of people get out of debt. Every month you wait costs you more in interest and fees. The best time to start was yesterday. The second best is right now. If I had needed this product, it is most certainly what I would use. So when the numbers are clear, you take action. Take back control in 30 seconds. Get your free personalized assessment and the best option for you at pdsdebt.com/Phang. That's pdsdebt.com/Phang. Phang is how you spell it. pdsdebt.com/Phang.
Fast forward in time, the search warrant was obtained because of suspicion of dealing of drugs out of this particular apartment that Breonna Taylor was living in with her boyfriend. Turns out, as people knew, Breonna Taylor had no involvement in the drug trade. In fact, no drugs were ever found in Breonna's apartment. Okay? Now, the police claimed that they knocked several times and that they did identify themselves as law enforcement before they tried to enter the apartment. Now, what was interesting is the Louisville PD had received court approval from a judge to be able to do a no-knock entry, meaning they could just go in without having to knock and announce their presence. However, the orders were changed before the raid on Breonna's apartment to a knock and announce warrant, meaning that the police were required to identify themselves. The officers forced entry at the exterior door and were, quote, immediately met with gunfire. 3 officers returned fire. Now, Breonna's boyfriend said that he was terrified and was fearing for his life and that he shot in self-defense because these cops did not identify themselves as they used a battering ram to bust down off the hinges the front door to the apartment that he was sharing with Breonna Taylor. He thought someone was trying to break into his home. And what's amazing is the police's own incident report was just rife with errors and with lies. The police incident report said Breonna had no injuries, even though she had been shot at least 5 times. And the police report said that they had not forced their way into the apartment, even though they used a battering ram to bust open the door. And of course, no body cam footage available at all from this raid on her apartment. Prosecutors said that 3 officers lied in the affidavit that was used to get the warrant in the first place from a judge, and that they conspired to continue to lie about their lies after this horrific tragedy happened at Breonna's apartment. Now, the good DOJ, the Biden DOJ, accused officers of violating Breonna's right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. Some of the officers were also alleged to have conspired to falsify the affidavit for the warrant, and one of the officers was alleged of conspiring to hinder the subsequent investigation into the shooting. But because of how horrible this no-knock entry situation was, not only did you get the Biden DOJ policy saying that you cannot do the no-knock warrant unless an officer reasonably fears that there's going to be harm to him or to him, her, or someone else. City officials in Louisville banned the use of no-knock warrants in June of 2020, and a year later, Governor Andy Beshear signed a partial ban on no-knock warrants statewide in the state of Kentucky. The DOJ also conducted a wide-ranging investigation of the Louisville Police Department and released in March of 2023, 3 years later, a damning 90-page report documenting a pattern and practice of abuses, including excessive force, searches based on no-knock warrants, illegal car stops and detentions, harassment of people during street sweeps, and broad patterns of discrimination against Black people. Okay? So, the other benefit of this happening, and then by the way, there were federal charges brought, and judge dismissed some of the charges. One officer retired and pleaded guilty. Another one was fired. And then one of the officers went to trial, and it was a mess. So again, so the DOJ said, look, the Breonna Taylor tragedy necessitates this change in policy back in 2021. We have to change the policy. We got to do no knock because, we have to eliminate no knock, or really limit no knock, because this is a yet another tragedy waiting to happen, right? But then, of course, Todd Blanche, again, very quietly last week, while we're all distracted by everything else that's going on, Todd Blanche signs this new memo that says, oh, hey, guess what? There were unnecessary restrictions imposed by the Biden-era restriction, that Biden DOJ. So, quote, we must allow our brave men and women in law enforcement to carry out their duties to the fullest extent permitted by law. So now there's a, quote, common sense approach to law enforcement to ensure officer safety and to protect the integrity of criminal investigations, end quote. You notice how it doesn't mention anything about protecting the people that are now going to be subjected to illegal searches and seizures, the banging and the breaking down of the doors of their homes, that they're sleeping in the middle of the night. I mean, if you don't think, especially in states like Florida, which is open carry, who gives a shit if you have training or any type of license to be able to carry and own a firearm. But I'm going to tell you right now, somebody busts down the door to my home, my stand my ground energy is going to be, fuck off, I have a gun. So if you don't think that this is now going to create more death, maiming, dismemberment, and harm, Todd Blanche is an idiot. But I thought it was really important to share this information with you because they are so sneaky in this regime. They do this stuff and they think that we're not going to be paying attention, but I am paying attention. And I need you to know, because this is the type of stuff that is the substance of nightmares when it comes to good law enforcement, good prosecution, public safety, safety of Americans. This is the kind of stuff. This is the stuff of nightmares. So I want you to take this video and I want you to spread it far and wide. I also want you to subscribe if you aren't, and tell people to subscribe, because this is the type of information that we all need to know about. So be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. It is March 12th, 2026. And I am out there rattling the cages for all of us.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.